I know. We're going to get there. So one of the things that the state standard says, hi, this is the 6th of March, 2018. Sorry, did I scare you there? No. And we're doing the bunny love, population growth packet. Bunny love, because it's got bunnies and they're in love. Well, they're not in love, but they're going to have baby bunnies. It asks you for a word equation to describe the growth. Now, yesterday, you already figured out that the growth rate, if you have 50 births and only 30 deaths every year, is 0.2% of the population being added every year. So, in some year, we take last year's population, we add 0.2 of that population. And this is a sentence. How do we know it's a sentence? It has all the hallmarks of a sentence. It's got a capital letter at the beginning. It is more or less all words. There are a few numbers and symbols in there, and it's got a period at the end. That, my friends, is a sentence. Ah, so you ask, but how then, oh crazy Moser, do I write a word equation? So why am I doing this to you? Because I'm mean, because I like to torture teenagers. But other than that, because the state standards specify now that they want you using algebraic approaches to look at population growth models. And this is baby algebra. This is not scary algebra. Don't freak out. But it is basically an algebraic relationship. Huh, really? You don't say. So how would we turn this sentence, and how many of you had a sentence that was similar to this? A couple of you. I think a couple of you did, in the sort of spying on you that I did. Okay, that's good. Because you can turn this sentence into an equation by substituting all that verbiage into symbols and numbers. Symbols and numbers. So let's try this. Okay, so I'm going to start off with what I want to find. I want to find population in any year. Okay? So I want to know the population in year X, and I don't know if I want to look at year 2 or year 10 or year 563, but I want an equation that will work for any year that I can pull out of that chart. Okay. What is that year equal to? Okay, hold on. Well, we know that to figure out, year 15's population growth, we have to go back to year 14. To figure out year 20's population, we have to go back to year 19. To figure out year 532's population, we have to go back to year 531. So it's going to be equal to the population from year X minus 1 plus something. What are we going to add every year? Huh? The growth rate. The growth rate. Are we just going to add 0.2 bunnies, or are we going to add 0.2 of the population? 0.2 of the population. 0.2 bunnies are very, very messy. Get it? Because they would spill guts all over the place because they'd be cut in. Ew. Sorry. I couldn't help myself. Okay. So how do we express that we're adding 0.2% of the population? Well, we could do this. So hey, look at that. The population for any year is just equal to last year's population plus last year's population times 0.2. That's a word equation. Why is it a word equation? No period at the end, no capital letter at the beginning, no is's and justs and befores, blah, blah, blah. There are words that represent mathematical things, but largely we're relying on mathematical symbols and a very minimal number of words. And instead of saying things like last year's population, we say population of year X minus 1. Those of you taking chemistry will see similar echoes when you get to chemistry. But that's a word equation that describes the population growth. Huh. Now, without having read any farther, I know a few of you got all excited and you just kept going. That's okay. Just don't spoil it for anybody else. What's going to happen to this population? Is it going to ever decrease if we're just following this equation? No. Every year we got 20% more bunnies. 20% more bunnies, 20% more bunnies, 20% more bunnies until the whole world is full of bunnies. Does this remind you of any movies you've seen recently? Rat Attack! Sorry. No. Rat Attack. So, remember, we saw that population graph of rats, and we saw 400 rats become 600 rats, become what, 1,000 rats, become 12,000 rats, become a ravenous horde. I like it when they call it a ravenous horde. I think it's funny. Clearly you do not, and that is okay. We do not have to agree on what we think is funny. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about what this is. So I'm going to fill in the line there, and you guys all said you've graphed something like this, and it's called a what kind of curve? Exponential. Great. So let's talk about that. Guess what? There's a population growth model called the exponential growth model. When you graph population size of a population that's growing like this, guess what it looks like? An exponential curve. It's like magic. So, the exponential growth model describes a population that is growing very rapidly and that continues to grow rapidly, and then no matter how big the birth and death rate, no matter how big the population is, birth rate and death rate don't change. No more individuals are born, no more individuals die. The bigger the population gets, the faster it grows. The bigger it gets, the faster it grows. It's crazy. This sometimes gets called J-curve growth, and it's a little hard to see the J here, but if I do that, you can see that this could look like a J. Now, were we seeing this in rats in the movie?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Those rats were undergoing exponential growth. Their numbers just kept climbing. We had tons and tons and tons of baby rats at the end, or juvenile rats who were ready to breed. We had the, what did he call them, the grand old ladies who had been there at the very beginning, who had had 3 or 4 litters, who were still breeding. So we had this exponential growth. He said something at the very end. If you remember, at the very end of the movie, they're peeling back like rice straw, and he said, "It's totally unsustainable," in his very heavy Australian accent. "There are rats everywhere. They're looking for..." I'm doing a terrible, terrible job with that.
Oi, oi.
Oi. Yeah. Yeah, let's not start that. If you get ugly very fast. He says, "It's completely unsustainable. There are so many rats, they can't find any place to hide. They're hiding any place they can. This is a population in for a huge..." What did he say? Ah, interesting. Okay. No, of course this doesn't usually happen. This does not usually, you don't usually see exponential growth in nature. When it does happen, however, it is typically for a little period of time, and then there is a crash. So, when you have finished copying this slide, I would invite you to stand up. We're going to play Moser's Stupid Human Tricks. When we have J-curve growth, we see this crazy, tremendous population growth. Ken Applin said in the film, this is not sustainable. This is a population that's in for a huge, what word did he use? Crash. This is a population that's in for a huge crash. And when they talked about the rats that would have otherwise eaten Moya's crop, Moya and Mami's crop, they said, you know, that 4th pulse arrived after their rice was harvested, and an army of hungry rats did what? Starved in the forest. They had this exponential population growth followed by, boom, an enormous crash. Because this is not really sustainable. You can see, you want to do it now? Oh. Awesome. Oh, you're all by yourself. That is embarrassing, isn't it?
No, he can do it. He embarrasses himself. He's good.
Okay. Boom. Yes. He doesn't have to do high pitched if he doesn't want to.
I did it earlier.
Boom. That's pretty good. We could actually do interpretive dance for population growth models. It is my dream to assign an interpretive dance project to illustrate scientific concepts. So if anybody here has been in like dance since they were 5 years old, please talk to me. I would love to schedule something. Really? Stop pointing. No pointing. You can't volunteer somebody else. Okay, so exponential growth can't go on forever. Why did the army of hungry rats starve in the forest?
They had no food.
The army of hungry rats starved in the forest. Hey, focus back, focus back, focus back. Because there was no what? Food. Hence why they starved. So what tends to cause the crash at the end of a period of exponential growth? Either not enough food, or, even more disgusting, marinating in your own waste. Ew. Once you've eaten everything and, let's say, processed it, there are still nutrients available in the ecosystem, but they may not be a form that works for you. One of the places we do tend to see exponential growth is bacteria in a petri dish. Bacteria are awesome at exponential growth. And you can get bacteria to grow exponentially for a couple of days sometimes. When bacteria are growing in a petri dish, you have this stuff. It looks like Jell-O in the bottom of the dish. And it's actually called agar. And if you make your own agar, you take beef broth and you boil it with gelatin. And you make like beef flavored Jell-O, which sounds fairly disgusting. But it's a good source of nutrients for those bacteria. So they'll spend a couple days eating up all the agar that they can. And they don't eat, I mean, you put like a, half a centimeter of agar on the bottom of that plate if you're prepping plates yourself. They don't eat all the agar. There's still food for them. What's the problem? They poison themselves with their own waste. So a little later in the year, we will make root beer. Root beer is produced, well, modern root beer is not produced this way. The root beer we're going to make, have you? Cool. The root beer that we're going to make is produced via alcoholic fermentation by yeast. Yes, we'll make booze in here, but trust me, you would have to drink like 463 gallons of it to feel any sorts of effects, and you would vomit just from the sheer quantity of liquid long before that. So yeah, it won't work. But alcohols like beer and wine are also brewed via alcoholic fermentation by yeast. So you take these little, I call them yeasty beasties, my little yeasty friends, little yeasty beasties. I'm drawing them much, much larger than, hey, they're doing work for me. They're making root beer. How nice of them. So we put them in there with sugar, food, and they fart out carbon dioxide. That's how we get the carbonation in the root beer. Same thing happens if you're brewing beer or making wine. They fart out little carbon dioxide bubbles. That's what they're doing. And they also produce little bits of alcohol. Ethanol, the kind of alcohol people drink to get drunk. Not this kind, but ethanol. So why don't we use this on lab surfaces when people are sick? What will it do? It'll kill the bacteria. Who has hand sanitizer on their purse or backpack? Okay. Anybody got one where they can read the ingredients? Wait, I can read this one. Ingredient, ethyl alcohol. Hey, this is the booze kind. You can, you shouldn't, but you can. They make hand sanitizers out of the consumable kind of alcohol because little kids have been known, my daughter's terrible at rubbing it all off her hands. So, if I give her a glob of alcohol hand sanitizer before she eats something, a good chunk of it will usually go in her mouth. Oh well. But this won't kill her. Rubbing alcohol will. That's why they make it out of jellied ethyl alcohol. No, you cannot drink that. You cannot drink isopropyl alcohol. It will kill you. Fast. Do not ever, ever, ever do that. You've been told that before, I assume. Okay. So, alcohol poisons little microbes. These yeasty beasties start off with water and sugar. They fart out carbon dioxide, and they pee out. It's a metaphor. It's a bad metaphor. They pee out alcohol. Now, if you're brewing beer or wine, you let them go. But here's the thing. They'll take this thing from, and they're going to take this from 0% alcohol and, whatever percent sugar and whatever percent water. They're going to take this to about 10% alcohol, and that is enough to kill them all. They will literally poison themselves. So they experience exponential growth in this bottle of root beer. Now, we're not going to take our root beer to 10%. We'll take it to about 0.5% before we shut it down.
Are we going to drink it?
Yeah. Yeah. But if you're brewing beer or wine, those yeasty beasties are going to produce alcohol until they literally kill themselves. They poison themselves. They poison their environment. There's so much alcohol in there, they all die. That's crazy. Now, there have been strains of yeast which have been found to have mutations which allowed them to survive higher alcohol concentrations. So people who brew beer and wine have actually bred those strains selectively. There's one strain that I think can survive up to like 14% alcohol. Could we make a tolerance curve for yeast and percent alcohol concentration? Yeah. And zero alcohol doesn't have any benefit or any harm to them, so they're fine up until you get to whatever percent, and then they go vroom, and they all die. Huh. Fascinating. So, what stops exponential growth? Too much waste, not enough food. They don't even eat up all the sugar when you're making beer or wine or root beer, but they just poison themselves. So what's the other example you can think of where you saw exponential growth recently? I feel like there was some kind of movie or documentary about some species that underwent exponential growth. Something's ringing a faint bell. Rat attack! I just like saying it that way. You don't have to. Rats. Rats and rat attack. That was exponential growth. And I love that movie because they actually show the exponential growth curve, which I think is phenomenal. Now, once they got to that fourth pulse and all the grain was harvested and all the bamboo fruit was germinated, what was coming next? Boom. Lots of cannibalism, lots of dead, starving rats out in the forest. Nothing good for the rat population. And it would crash back down to its normal level. That's what we're going to talk about. So read question number 7. Talk about what it means at your table. Okay, so that is the logistical growth model. It means the population has reached carrying capacity, and now we start to see birth and death rates change. Tomorrow, okay, so you're gonna finish the graph of population, the chart for homework. You can be working on it right now. You may get it done. Tomorrow you're going to graph. What you're going to see on your graph is how to find carrying capacity from population data. Because once you get to carrying capacity, birth rates and death rates change. It's not all one directional. And you can see why this is called S-curve. That's all we got today.